Today I'm going to read from my book, Coming Ashore. There are three sections. One is England, where I was a student at Oxford. One is in Cleveland, where I taught during 1968 when Cleveland was burning. And the last one is this last section is in Toronto. So I've decided to do a reading from Oxford, 1968, when I am 21 years old. That was just last year. Before I do the reading, I always feel like a bit of a phony when I say that I went to Oxford, so I just want to tell a little bit about how I happened to get to Oxford. Okay, my father, when I was 15, got a brain tumor, and so he wasn't able to function after that. But when I was 14, he told me he was only paying for university if I became a teacher or a nurse. People are nodding, like everyone who's around my age, like that was the thing you had to be. He said, look, let's face it, with your personality, do you think you're going to marry? No. He said, you need a profession. You need a profession. And he said, and he grew up in the Depression, so he said, you've got to have a job where, you're sure that you're going to get paid. And my mother said, well, she simply can't be a nurse. She has white hair and you have to wear white. That's out. She would look washed out, and that's out of the question. Right? Okay, so then there's a teacher, right? I didn't want to be a teacher. I said, I don't want to be a teacher. I don't have patience. It isn't what I want to do. And so then I decided, and so then he started the thing that often fathers do, this thing, too bad. So I said, okay. So I decided to do a double major. And I thought, I'll become a teacher, I'll take all the education, plus I'm going to do a BA with the sciences. So while everybody was taking 6 courses, I was taking 12. But, I have a lot of energy, and it wasn't a big deal. So I said, okay. But then, of course, it came to exam time, right? And it was pretty bad. And so I went to the resident assistant. Those are the people who get paid to tell you how to deal with your problems. So I went to her and I said, I'm really upset because I only have 72 hours to read Paradise Lost. And it's 12 books. And I don't know what to do. And she said, oh, well, you need medication. She said, well, you absolutely have to have medication. She said, so what you have to do is go to Mary Lee. She takes, she's in business, and all of those shoeboxes are different pills. You need to tell her you're doing Paradise Lost and get the right pill. So I said, oh, really? I don't know. I'm already a hyper person. That makes me nervous. And she said, you asked, I get paid for the job, and I'm telling you what to do. So I went, I got it, and I took the pill. Okay, so then, I'm from a Catholic family, right, where I'm the only one in my family, believe it or not, that is not a Jesuit priest or a nun. The only one in my extended family. So I know a lot about the Garden of Eden in the Bible. Okay, so as I'm reading Paradise Lost with this pill, I suddenly realized, wow, there is a problem here because God has said to the snake, I am taking away your legs, you will slither on the ground forever because you're delivering a bad message. And I thought, why is he getting punished for the message? That's an unfairness in the Garden of Eden. Anyway, because I had taken this pill, I became enraged about this topic. And I wrote, instead of writing an essay, I wrote book 13 of Paradise Lost, an iambic pentameter, from the point of view of a paraplegic snake. So I gave it to my professor. I had no choice. Once I finished it, I came out, I thought it was 24 hours later, it was 72. I came out, handed it in, what else could I do? I had, 6 more papers to write. And my professor happened to be from Oxford. And he read it and said, he loved it. He said, this is amazing, you're really a poet. I want you to know I've never written a poem before or since. Right? But I did go to Oxford, and I did get a scholarship. So that's how I arrived at Oxford. Right? So, yeah. I'm going to read now about my very first day at Oxford. And I almost didn't want to go, but I had been arrested, and the FBI had investigated me for civil rights. I've been very involved in civil rights in the Black Panther breakfast program in 1968. So I know. And then there was a murder, and then they were investigating, and the FBI were at my house. So then I decided, okay, and then my graduation was canceled due to riots, and people blamed me. So when my mother said, when you get to Oxford, please be low key. Like, try as hard as you can not to be, to cause any kind, because the Brits don't like it. Right? I said, no, I know. I'm really just going to be quiet and do my reading. So I'm just going to start with my first day at Oxford. The next morning, after donning half of the clothes I bought with me just to eat breakfast, it's not that cold, actually, in England, but it's as cold outside as it is inside, always. I went to let my bicycle in some godforsaken back alley that had no name. Reggie referred to it as off the map, under the first bridge I would meet after taking 2 right turns, not including the right turn I took out of the college. Reggie said to go past the bridge, then double back under the bridge, and there between the bridge and the river, which was that high, I would find the bike shop. As strange as it seemed, there was indeed a bike lean-to under the bridge. The proprietor had a crooked neck, presumably from crouching under the bridge for most of his life. As he handed me over an old, rickety bike, I noticed the lifelines in his hands were gray, as though his skin had been tattooed with grease. I rented the bike for a year. I asked if it came with a lock. He replied in a thick Scottish accent that nothing in Oxford had been stolen as far as he was aware. He added in his heavy Highland burr, "You'll have to go to the United States of America now to have things stolen, won't you?" I asked if there was a light, and he groused that it was a generator light, which worked when I pedaled. "If you learn how to work, now light will be shed, won't it?" He began to explain how the bike worked. I rolled my eyes and told him I'd been riding a bike all my life and I knew how to do it. He said that Americans who think they invented the wheel often have a problem with English brakes. I rode away while he was still blathering on because he wouldn't stop, and besides, I didn't understand what he was saying. His accent was too thick. I cycled over the top of the bridge and waved gaily to the old Glaswegian troll under it. He just shook his head as he wiped some oil off his pants, shiny with layers of accumulated toil. I love physical activity, and this bike riding was the best since it combined exercise with transportation. In Oxford, almost everyone rode a bike, no matter if you were 20 or 80. And the university was made up of different colleges that were spread around, and they were somewhere quite far apart. Although you were housed in a certain college, you could have courses in other colleges, so everyone had to cycle. Little old women in thick Marks and Spencer flesh-colored tights rode the bike to the shops. Men with cigarettes perched in their lower lips drove along in dress trousers and tweed jackets and Dublin or wool hats. There is nothing more gorgeous than an English morning. The sunlight sparked off the icy gauze of early morning dew on the crunchy greens. Everything was fresh and clear, and the colors seemed supersaturated. A bracing English morning could wash away all sins, no matter how mortal, from the night before. The colleges all had manicured lawns, and the shops looked Victorian with so many, small rooms lined in wood, just as I had imagined they would look. I sped along the road, going faster and faster. I decided to go to the post office, which I had seen right across from the Trinity College gate, and send my parents a postcard to let them know I'd arrived safely. Actually, my mother had never asked me to do this, but I continued the form as though we were a normal family, instead of one whose addled father thought J. Edgar Hoover was a vacuum, and that President Johnson said no Irish Catholics could drive until the war in Vietnam was over. Right, we had to give him reasons why he couldn't do things. At the age of 21, I still loved the rush of speed. I was now going at full tilt, not slowing down for that one-room post office. I was speeding up, planning a stunning dismount, when at the last second, I pressed back on my pedals with all my might. But the bike didn't stop. It didn't even slow down. There were no brakes, so the pedals just spun backwards. Oh my God, the bike mechanic had said something about English brakes. Where the hell were they? I hit the post office window at full velocity, and I flew right through it, shattering the glass. I went airborne past the stamp lineup, and with a loud thud, came to an abrupt landing against the old mahogany counter. I was bleeding, but I did manage to stand. The postal employee looked at me, dripping in blood, and said, "Special delivery?" postmaster came out from the mailroom and quipped, Americans always want airmail, I'm afraid. And the old woman whispered to another in the lineup, American, I'll wager cutting in line. Her friend said they're taught that at home. No one suggested calling an ambulance or a doctor. They acted as though I decided to go through the window, as opposed to using the door just to save time. The postmaster cleaned my arm off with an old cloth used for dampening stamps. Fortunately, it was mostly my coat that was ripped to shreds. There was surprisingly little tissue damage other than the long brush burn on the side of my face. I had a gash on the top of my head, but my hair caught the blood from that. They gave me a plaster from the rusty first aid box, and that was it. Later, when I went to the doctor in London, he looked at the scar on my head and said, well, that could have used a stitch or two, but never mind. A local bobby arrived with a legal-sized sheath of paper in his hand and said, in a bit of a rush, were we? Yeah, I didn't realize the brakes were on the handlebars. Who do you think is going to remunerate the offended party for the window, what with the emergency glass service required and all? Send the bill to me at Trinity College. You at the college, then? He inquired, trying to hide his incredulity. Yes. My head was spinning and I was feeling nauseous from the bang on my head. Two women shook their heads. What was the world coming to if Oxford could not let in only girls, but American girls who drove through windows? A scholarship student? Asked the clerk who was now sweeping up the glass. Yeah, well, sort of. I don't know, is this pertinent information? I asked, now seeing double and leaning on the counter. Going to be a pretty penny, I can tell you that. By noon, everyone had heard about my airmail delivery. Not one person said anything like, oh my God, you went through the post office window on your first day at Oxford? Or what an idiot, or how amazing, or how hilarious, or are you all right? That afternoon, my tutorial included only one bruised American girl with Professor Beach in his luxurious study. When he saw me, he said absolutely nothing about my injuries. He ignored my shut eye, my bruising, and my swollen face. He never alluded to my cranium, swollen to a point on the top, which made me resemble a recent high forceps delivery. He proceeded to discuss Coleridge. Now, several years later, when I went through my mother's belongings after she died, I found my letter to her describing the post office caper. My mother loved that letter. She said she opened it in the brain tumor radiation waiting room and burst out laughing. To prevent herself from looking crazy, she read it to the waiting room and they howled too. It really made me feel good that so many people enjoyed that outing. My mother said that my father loved the story as well, and when she thought he might be a bit down, she would read him the letter. One of the great things about having no memory is that something would be funny again and again and again. My mother said no matter what the window cost, it was totally worth it. I did finally receive a bill that amounted to $200 American, which is a fair chunk of change in the 1960s. When I rode up to the post office to pay the bill, everyone stood back. I approached the postmaster and he said to me, "It's all taken care of, miss." I said, "Who paid for it?" "Compliments of the Queen in the year of the Prince's investiture." I said, "Well, that was really nice of her, given how busy she must be." I had landed with a thud in a truly foreign land. The terrifying thing was that they did speak English, so you could have the false sense that you shared more than you actually did. George Bernard Shaw expressed my sentiments perfectly. England and America are two countries separated by the same language.